I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On this week's episode, we got an SEC win to celebrate, Will. 45-28 over Mississippi State on the road. The Gators improved to 1-1 in SEC play. Uh, enjoy it. Enjoy it. There's plenty to critique. There was plenty of good, but I would just say in general, enjoy this victory here because the schedule's getting pretty tough here heading into October. I know November gets a lot of attention, but October has plenty of its own challenges as well. So a nice win for the Gators on the road. The defense has had their struggles. The offense really shined all day. 508 total yards of offense for the Gators, 277 combined through the air from Mertz and Lagway. They went 26-28 on the day. Burke, Badger, DK, Mizell, and Hanson combined for 204 of those receiving yards. Really didn't show up on the stat sheet for Mizell specifically, but he had a breakout against Mississippi State. We really saw what he was capable of. A lot of what we saw in his high school film, so it's cool to see that actually in action. I know maybe, Will, we can get a good explanation from you on that Montrell Johnson block. That was it was a beauty when you replayed it, and then you go back and for some reason there's a flag on the ground. But so Mizell had a nice touchdown run ripped off of that call. Another 226 on the ground by Johnson Webb and freshman Jaden Baugh. We saw a steady rotation. We saw Jackson in there a little bit. Baugh had some real nice runs. He only had 4 carries, I believe, but he had some real nice runs on the day. But Will, I do have a comment here with the quarterback rotation. It went great. Mertz played well. Lot more toward Mertz than it was Lagway. I wanted to point out one thing: plays of 10 yards or more, and whether or not they were runs or passes with Mertz, you had 10 plays of 10 yards or more with Mertz. That was across 7 drives and 42 plays. 2 of those were runs, 8 of those were passes. Go to the Lagway. Same stat, 10 yards or more on a given play. 8 of those were runs, 4 of those were passes, in 12 total plays of 10 yards or more. And that was across 3 drives and 23 plays. So for those of you who do think it looks a little bit different with DJ Lagway on the field, I would say it looks a little bit different with DJ Lagway on the field. However, hats off to Graham Mertz. Very solid day, particularly through the air. In that first half, he really got hot, had a few nice drives there.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think what you said at the start is probably the most important takeaway from this is against FBS opponents, Florida had lost 7 straight games. And so to go on the road in the SEC against anybody is significant to get that sort of win, to get that monkey off your back, to get back to even in the SEC and to get back to even record overall, right? 2-2. Florida could go on a run. I think you and I both looked at the schedule and suspect that that's probably not in the cards. But that still exists that you're able to do that. And look, you can't beat Central Florida until you beat Mississippi State. You can't beat Tennessee until you've beaten Central Florida and Mississippi State. Like you can only play who's in front of you. And so Florida, after the debacle against Texas A&M, to come back out and quite honestly change their philosophy on offense. So Graham Mertz's average depth of target was 5.1 against Mississippi State. DJ Lagway's was under 6 as well. If you look at Mertz against Texas A&M, it was up over 9, his average depth of target, and it was 11.7 against Miami. So they talked all offseason about going downfield with Graham Mertz. They tried it in the first couple of games of the season, and it didn't work. And it didn't work because the offensive line couldn't hold up. But I think more than anything, it didn't work because Graham Mertz has really sort of proven himself to be a short to long type of guy, right? It's throw short, throw short, throw short, lull the defense to sleep. And now that opens up the deep attempts. So the throw to Burke in the corner is a great example where the corner bit on what he thought was going to be a little hitch, and he tried to grab onto to Burke as he went by, couldn't get him, and it's a really easy throw for Mertz. The throw to Hanson down the seam is another one where the linebackers were really sort of eyes in the backfield waiting for a pass to go out to Montrell Johnson, who was split wide, or Mizell, like you mentioned. Like they were ready for those sorts of things at that point. and all of a sudden Hansen is able to streak past the linebackers, the safety can't get over, and it turns into a touchdown. And really, when you look at what Florida did last year against the South Carolinas and the LSUs and the Missouris and the Arkansas of the world, like Florida didn't win all those games, but they were in all of those games. And Graham Mertz was effective in all of those games in many ways because they were dink and dunk, dink and dunk, dink and dunk. Oh, now we have something open deep. They went back to that against Mississippi State. Now, I will say it's a whole lot easier to go back to that when your screen pass to Mizell gains 7 yards on first down. If you get stuffed for -1 and now you're sitting at second and 11, you don't have the opportunity to take that downfield shot anymore. And so, the screen passes being successful are what makes the defense creep up. Mississippi State doesn't have a very good defense. And so that's going to be the question, right? Is against better defenses as Florida moves forward, can they use the same strategy or is it going to be a struggle? Now, the good news is it looks like Trey Wilson's going to be back this week against Central Florida. If he's not back against Central Florida, he should be back the week after. So having a healthy Trey Wilson to go along with Badger, Mizell, DK, now all of a sudden you've got the real makings of a wide receiver room that can threaten both the edges, but also then threaten deep. And if you can start to combine those things together, I can see where Florida's offense can get to be more than competent because in the first 4 games of the year, other than the DJ Lagway performance against Samford, I would say it's mostly competent. But I think, look, we know who Mertz is and we know what Lagway's strengths are, and the guy's strengths are different. I think in terms of what you want them to execute, there's a lot of overlap in that Venn diagram. But in terms of Lagway is a guy who looks deep and then checks down and sometimes forgets to check down and runs around a lot and gets sacked. Mertz is a guy who starts shallow and then works his way deep unless they've really set up that deep shot. And that's just sort of who those guys are. So yeah, the offense looks different when Lagway's in there for a couple of reasons. One, Lagway can do something with his feet, though it's not, I mean, they had that called QB run when they were deep in their own territory that sort of started that first drive where Lagway was able to drive for a touchdown.
On third and long.
Yeah,
Yep.
the other part of it is it's really easy to go down the field when it's 14-0 or 14-7 or whatever it was at that point, right? Like it's easy to play and play free when you're a quarterback who comes in, your offense is already humming and your team's up. Now, credit to Lagway, he didn't stall anything, right? And credit to Mertz and his ability to sort of handle it and come right back in and sort of pick up where he left off
Hmm.
when he was given opportunities. But yeah, I mean, this is going to be the conundrum for Napier all years. He's clearly got a more talented guy at backup, but he's also got a lot of sweat equity in Mertz. And, this will be the question, right? Is can Florida take the offensive philosophy against Mississippi State and take that game plan and superimpose it on more talented opponents, or is this something that's only going to work against opponents who are not as talented? And yeah, that'll be the question as we move forward.
We're looking at a situation where, and we saw it again with the defense here against Mississippi State. And we'll get to the defense here in a second, but we're looking at a situation where this offense is going to need to score. Am I being ridiculous saying 40 points a game if we're going to win? It's got to be about 40, right?
I mean,
We got
it depends on what you mean by win. Like if you mean win 9 games, then yeah,
no,
they're
no,
gonna
no,
they're gonna have to average
just
40 points.
week to week competitiveness
I think it's
with
good.
knowing what the defense is. If we just accept what the defense is and hypothetically if the defense doesn't make any improvement and is what it is, this offense we're going to need at least 40 out of it week to week.
I'm not sure that that's entirely correct. I'd have to look and see what Florida actually gave up last year. I think it's around 32, and this defense is right around where that was last year. They're only giving up 27 points per game this year. Now that does include the Samford game, so you do need to take that out. Okay, so
Not
27.
40, but 39.25. Is that good for you, Will?
Wow, so that
39.25?
So they gave up 27.6 points per game last year. Now
Yeah,
against the Georgias of the world, the Missouris of the world, the Arkansas of the world, like real teams, they gave up 30 to 35 for the most part.
right.
So that to me is the magic number. If Florida's offense can put up 35 points, they're probably going to win most of those games. If you look at the Missouri game last year, I think they had 31 or 32. If you look at the Arkansas game, I don't think they got to 35. If you look at the game against South Carolina, the last touchdown to Ricky Pearsall put them up over that 35 mark. To me, that's probably the key number is 35. I know you're sort of just having fun with the defense and saying we need to score 40. And there's not much difference between 35 and 40, but that's a big difference, right? I mean, offenses that score 40 points per game, we're talking top 10 offenses. Offenses that score 35 points per game, we're probably talking top 20. And this offense with Mertz at the quarterback position potentially could get into that top 20. There's no chance they're getting into the top 10, especially with the running game the way it is. And so, yeah, I mean, that's sort of where I'd sit. I'd sit 35. You might lose a couple, 38 to 35. But I think you're also going to win some 35, 31, that sort of stuff.
Well, we got the rest of the season to talk about this quarterback rotation, I suppose.
Well,
So
we
we
certainly
can,
do because apparently it's around
yeah,
all year.
yeah. That's what came out this week is that it's
Uh,
we're going to see it. I don't know how you say something like that. I don't know how you say something like that because things can. The idea is that things do change on the field and things can change, but
well,
that's what's being said. So okay.
well, now you are highlighting the frustration that many people have with Billy Napier, which is that the honestly the criticism for him in a lot of different places is that he is too slow to adjust. And the idea that you would come out and say that, whether it's true or not, the idea that you would come out and say that in the middle of the bye week and essentially say, yeah, everybody's job is safe is essentially what he's saying. And I'm not sure that's a good message to send, especially considering the message up until that point was this has been a no excuses. This has been a bye week where we're not making it easy, that sort of stuff. Something that's like, we're not making it easy, but by the way, um, we're not really having a quarterback competition.
Well, and by the
That's
way, it's
annoying.
not just this is not just a pro Lagway comment. It's a if Mertz has the hot hand, which for the first half against Mississippi State, he did have the hot hand for a stretch. Like, don't take the ball out of his hands if he's feeling it that day, or if he's on that day. It should be if it's the type of thing where we're going to use whoever's best in a given moment, fine. But like commit to that. Like be use if Lagway is the better option in the moment, use Lagway. If Mertz is the better option, use Mertz. I don't think it needs to be some steady rotation. And we certainly did not see in every other series rotation here in Mississippi State. So we did see a little bit of an evolution from Napier against Mississippi State here.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think out of all the things that we can criticize, the quarterback situation probably has it certainly has the most visibility to people. I think it's sort of a Rorschach test for where you think the program is and what you think about Napier, um but it's also not the most critical thing that's going on the team right now. I'll be perfectly like if you give me Graham Mertz 2023 level quarterback play and a top 10 defense, we've got a really effective team. If
Well,
you give me a top 50 defense, you've got a team that's winning 8 games. You give me this defense and you're struggling to win three or struggling to win four.
I'm
And
talking about things that are possible. You're talking about top 10 defenses.
we'll
So
talk about it. We'll see. Maybe they made some adjustments over the bye week.
it's one of the best bye weeks of all time, from what I'm
It really
hearing. One of
is.
the greatest bye weeks you can ever have.
Sounds
And
like fall camp all over again.
they went into Starkville here. Mississippi State, not exactly a great rushing offense. They only combined for 90 yards on the ground against Arizona State and Toledo. Rushed for 240 against the Gators. And really not a great sign when you're walking into this UCF game here. And we will get to that in a second. But I just want to go through the second half. I felt like in the first half, it was a respectable performance. You gave up that drive before the half to cut it down to a two-touchdown lead, and it took a little bit of luster off that first half. But still, you're going to the half up 2 touchdowns. The defense played fairly well. Several three and outs, which we haven't seen a ton of. Several three and outs in that first half, and aside from that last drive, played pretty well. So they come back in the second half, 13 plays, 75 yards, touchdown. 12 plays, 68 yards, fumble recovery after a fourth and goal from the UF1. So Florida holds, but it's on the 1 yard line. Following drive, 12 plays, 75 yards, touchdown. Following drive, 13 plays, 74 yards, and you hold Mississippi State on the 1 yard line as time expires. So one of those things, Will, I know I've busted out the stat a few times where you could talk about the possible total yardage that a team can gain. Not only is an offense that has not rushed very well all season, just holding the ball 13 plays, 12 plays, 12 plays, 13 plays, and just going down the field at will. But it seems like coming out of the locker room, just no adjustment to what's coming. Like we know which side won on the adjustments in terms of the Mississippi State offensive coaches and the Florida defensive coaches at halftime.
Yeah, I mean, so adjustments are difficult at this point. I'm not sure what adjustments you want them to make. If you look at Sports Info Solutions, they've got some really cool tendency charts that we look at over there. Seven-man box, has used 19% this year. A light box, they've used 70% of the time. And then a stack box, they've used 11%. They're 64% too high shell. So a light box too high shell is basically the defense that they have been playing. And the problem is that every time they do anything even remotely aggressive, they get killed. So they have blitzed 23% of the time, and on those snaps, they've given up a 53% success rate, which is 120th in the country. I actually think maybe the solution is just to go three-man rush. They've only done that 16 snaps or on 16 pass plays this year, but they've given up 19% success rate. Now, some of that is because a lot of times you do three-man rush when, it's like 3rd and 14 and you're willing to give them a 7-yard gain or something like that. But they're so bad at tackling and they're so bad in coverage and they don't get any pass rush anyway. Like when they send four guys, they're unsuccessful. When they send five, they're even worse. Like that's the thing is it's a 41% success rate with a four-man rush, which is 58th in the country, but it's a 53% every time they blitz. So it's malpractice if this Florida defense blitzes because the guy never gets home, the DBs can't tackle, and they just get burned over and over and over again. And so a lot of people are shouting about the conservative nature of Ron Roberts' play calls. I actually think the move is probably to get more conservative. And as weird as that sounds, like if they come out and they start using three-man rushes more often, like I would even maybe put an extra linebacker out there, talking about, a 3-3-5 or something. And, just put an extra backer out there and say, look, he's going to be out there to tackle when we get no pass rush because we don't get a pass rush, whether we bring three guys or four guys anyway. Just let a couple offensive linemen stand back there and not do anything and at least you got an extra guy in coverage. And I mean, in many ways, that's sort of giving up and saying, we can't win up front, and we're just going to sort of resolve to do that. But honestly, I mean, given the numbers, I mean, Florida, 107th in yards per, 93rd in yards per rush, 121st in yards per pass. They're just awful. And when they bring pressure, they're extra awful. And so, considering, especially in this particular matchup with Central Florida, some of the explosive stats we'll probably get to in the not too distant future, I think more conservative is the way to go. And Roberts is way more conservative so far than Austin Armstrong was last year. It's a complete 180 in terms of what Florida did last year. They were much more middle of the field closed, much more single high safety, much more blitz. I mean, I think they were like 33% blitz. Now they're down to 23 under Armstrong. So they've dialed back the aggressiveness quite a bit. And we'll see. I mean, hopefully it was a bunch of tackling drills all week while they were off.
Is there an in between, Will? Is there an in between to
No,
not
there's
be
not. So there were
totally?
there
We don't have to be Armstrong aggressive, but we don't have to be Roberts conservative. Maybe because neither seems to work. So is there like an in between speed that we should maybe try?
no, and this is fundamentally the problem. It's the reason why I was disappointed in myself that I eventually changed and picked Florida over Miami is that you could see that Miami's offensive line was a strength and that Florida's defensive line was a weakness. And Florida's defensive line isn't just a weakness against Miami's good offensive line. Florida's defensive line is a weakness against Mississippi State's randomly, probably pretty poor offensive line. They're a liability even against Samford's offensive line. Like there were a few times in that game where Florida's defensive line got pushed around a little bit, especially early in the game before Samford sort of wore out. And fundamentally, I mean, Slackman's out with a meniscus injury. Jamari Lyons go out with an injury during camp. Caleb Banks, Cam Jackson, Pyburn is the best player Florida has right now. And he's not like an explosive player. There are a couple of film examples I'm hoping to get to this week before the game where he did a really nice job of setting the edge and forcing the running back into the inside where there was some help. And that's something that we have not seen from Florida defensive ends in the past, particularly one who's playing for Ole Miss now. And so, I think there's slight little bits of encouragement that you can see there, but until you can win one-on-one against the left tackle, there's always going to be a free offensive line. If you rush four, there's always going to be an offensive lineman who's available to pick up your blitzer, right? And I haven't seen anybody who can win a one-on-one battle up front. There's nobody that you have to game plan for if you're the opposition. In fact, I think you sort of game plan to attack certain guys on defense. Like when you see specific guys out there, you go, all right, that's the guy we're going to run towards, or that's the guy we're going to run away, or that's the guy we're going to make run. Um, that's the guy we'll double team, and when we do, it sort of opens things up on the other side. Like there's a lot of different things you can do, which is why I suggested one thing you might do is pull somebody off the line of scrimmage, have an extra linebacker out there, and maybe let him roam a little bit. You'll get killed in the running game doing it that way, but you're getting killed in the running game anyway. So at least then you've got an extra guy out there in coverage if you need it.
Well, it doesn't get much better here, Will, because UCF coming into the swamp here, ranked second in the nation with 326 rush yards per game. That's only behind an Army offense that still features elements of the triple option there. So we know the Knights can run the ball. KJ Jefferson's playing quarterback. We remember him from Arkansas last year. Obviously has had, I would say, some mixed reviews so far in Orlando. It's been a little bit of a struggle at times. UCF found themselves down by 3 touchdowns against TCU on the road a couple weeks ago. Found a way to win to improve to 3-0. Deion Sanders and company comes into the bounce house last weekend. I watched much of that game. Colorado played outstanding, and it just went up and down the field on them. Won 48-21, but Jefferson really struggled through uh, a couple key turnovers at inopportune times. Will, what do we make of this UCF offense coming in here against a Florida defense that really has struggled against the run? And we saw how they looked against a high octane offense in Miami. How you feeling about this matchup?
I mean, I feel terrible about this matchup. I think Central Florida has some real advantages when it comes to just like everybody does when they're taking on the Florida defense. You got PJ Harvey, who's averaging 7 yards a rush, Penny Boone averaging 6.4, Miles Montgomery averaging 7.1. Now, Xavier Townsend, the sort of wide receiver kick return specialist, is averaging 7.3 yards per rush. It sounds like he's opting out and opting to take a red shirt and won't be there for the game. So that certainly hurts. That hurts what Central Florida is trying to do overall. The interesting thing to me is that KJ Jefferson's averaging 4.3 yards per rush. And if you look at his time at Arkansas, he averaged 4.5 in 2021, 4.1 in 22, and then 2.8 in 2023. And interestingly, Dan Enos was the offensive coordinator there at Arkansas for 1 year in 2023. And everything tanked very similarly to the way everything tanked for the 1 year Enos was the offensive coordinator at Miami. And so KJ Jefferson, I think, if you look at his 21, 22, 23, and 24 stats now, his 24 stats look an awful lot like his 21 and 22 stats. And that was a guy who wasn't good enough to carry Arkansas, but was good enough if Arkansas's defense showed up to win them a fair amount of games. I'd have to go back and look, but I would say Arkansas probably went like 8-4 in those 21 and 22 games. So
Hmm.
that's kind of what you look at. He's an above average SEC quarterback who can run. And I think that's probably better than what Florida played against Texas A&M. Obviously, Florida made Cam Ward look like a star. Florida made KJ Jefferson look like a star last year. That was the best game Jefferson played while he was in Arkansas last year, coming into the swamp and beating Florida. A lot of those problems that Florida's had the last couple years on defense, and that last year that KJ Jefferson was able to take advantage of, are still there. The good news is that if you can stop their running game, and you make him one dimensional. You mentioned the Colorado game, and in some ways Colorado forced him to throw because they jumped up on Central Florida. At the same time, he threw 35 passes and his QB rating went way down. It was in the 130s. Whereas the first 3 games, he was at 14 throws, 17 throws, 22 throws. So I think in many ways that's probably the telltale sign as to whether Florida's defense has done its job is if Jefferson is somewhere between 18 to 23 or 24 passes, Florida's probably given up more than 40 points. If Jefferson's up in the 30 to 35 passes range, then I suspect that Florida's probably given up in the 28 to 31 range. And that 28 to 31 range gives Florida a chance to win.
Yeah, and look, this UCF defense comes in here allowing 34 points against TCU and 48 points against Colorado. Colorado really had their way with this UCF defense. Will I was shocked. I thought the Knights were a little better than what we saw Saturday. I didn't think Colorado was as good as what we. It's one of the two. I think I think either Colorado's much better than I'm thinking, or UCF's a little worse than I'm thinking. I'm not sure which yet, but we'll find out a little more on Saturday. But the defensive effort really gave me hope, especially seeing, maybe I know it's Mississippi State. I know their defense isn't playing great right now, but maybe it's a little bit of a spark for this Florida offense that had a real rough start the first few weeks of the season.
Yeah, I mean, so I think UCF's defense is very similar, or Central Florida's defense is very similar to Florida's, in that 73% two high shell, 21% one high shell. A lot of light box, again, similarly to Florida. They're playing about even middle of the field open, middle of the field closed. 27% of the time they blitz, but they give up a 61% success rate on those plays. So they're even worse than Florida when they blitz. So I think basically you're kind of looking at mirror images when you look at these teams. And that's even true if you look at the schedules, right? I mean, if you look at what Central Florida has played, they played New Hampshire, who's an FCS team, blew them out of the water. They played Sam Houston, who's a bad FBS team, beat them. They played at TCU, 37th in ESPN FPI, beat them by a point, and TCU missed a field goal at the end that could have put them ahead. I think it was like 58 yards, but still missed a field goal that could have won that one. And then Colorado blows them out of the water in FPI of 28. You look at Florida's schedule. They got Samford, they blow out of the water. That's the FCS opponent. They beat Mississippi State, who's a weak FBS team. And then you have the losses to Miami and Texas A&M. And the question in my mind is, if Central Florida played Miami and Texas A&M, what would the result be? And I think it would look very, very similar to what we saw for Florida. These are teams that, when you really start breaking it down, are incredibly, incredibly similar. Their defenses are both bad. I think Central Florida's defense is a little bit better in certain places. So they're better against the run, but they're bad against the pass. And so really it comes down to Mertz being able to take advantage. And the other thing I would say about Central Florida is that their defense is less susceptible to big plays than Florida's. So UCF's defense overall is ranked 50 or is ranked 17th, sorry, overall in I'm sorry. No, they're actually 52nd. They're ranked overall 52nd in terms of giving up 20 plus yard plays. Florida is ranked 104th. Florida's offense is ranked 82nd in gaining 20 plus yard plays. Central Florida's is 12th. So if you're looking for a key to the game, to me, the key to the game is these teams are both going to be playing conservative defenses. They're both going to be trying to limit the big plays. And even in the game you mentioned the other day against Colorado, they gave up 48 points, but they only gave up 5 explosive plays. Colorado was able to do what they wanted, but they had to sustain drives with small plays, 8 yards, 12 yards, 14 yards. That's not typically the way you score in college football. Typically, if you can force a team to make really long sustained drives, they will screw it up. And Florida historically has been that kind of offense where, they sort of stall in the red zone and they can't get the ball in after they sort of get down into those places. The only time that I can remember, so with Emory Jones, Florida's offense was like that. With Graham Mertz, Florida's offense has kind of been like that. With Anthony Richardson, they were explosive and couldn't go up and down the field. They weren't consistent, but they were explosive enough to get the ball in the end zone. But to me, then that's really the key. Like the key here is both defenses are going to be conservative. There's going to be some missed tackles. There's going to be some missed assignments. There's going to be some things because they're both bad. The question will be, can the other offense take advantage? And if the offense can take advantage, is it an 18-yard play? Is it a 12-yard play? Is it a 50-yard play? And Florida's given up a lot of those 50-yard plays, and they'll have to clean that up and hopefully have cleaned that up over the bye week because they should be more physically gifted than the Golden Knights.
Well, we also saw UCF turn over the ball 4 times against Colorado last week, 2 interceptions and 2 fumbles. So that definitely bolstered the Colorado effort last Saturday in Orlando. Uh, well, obviously, October, like I said earlier in the show here, it's a month that's for as much attention as November has received. UCF on the road to Tennessee versus Kentucky, then Georgia. That's not an easy slate. We saw Kentucky go down to Oxford last week and really surprise Lane Kiffin and the Rebels. This schedule's looking pretty brutal here in October here, Will, but starting strong with UCF is a must. This is absolutely a must-win game if you're going to have any semblance of a respectable season down the stretch.
Yeah, it's funny. I was it was really hard to decide what I was going to pick last week against Mississippi State. And the reason was is that it was entirely possible that Florida for an 11 a.m. Central Time start on the road after all the noise, the loss to Miami, the loss to A&M, it was really easy to see a scenario where Florida fell apart and where there was internal dissension and essentially it was something that the players are sitting there going, I'm just going to redshirt or I'm not going to give full effort, and we didn't see that. There are still some holes, there's still some gaps, there's still some areas where Florida certainly needs to improve, and there's some uncertainty in my mind and I think in yours as to whether they can improve. But what they didn't do is they didn't quit. And past Florida teams, when they've sort of gotten in these ruts where there's been a lot of noise in the program, have quit. Now,
Hmm.
look, Billy Napier, and we've sort of mocked him a little bit, and I've mocked him a lot about the culture talk and all that sort of stuff. But I do think that you got to give him and his squad credit for showing up at Mississippi State in Starkville and getting the job done in a situation where it would have been easy to sort of lay down. And my coach is pretty much gone anyway. Like, what's the incentive to be out here and fight? And so what that says to me is I think that they have the ability to continue to fight against Central Florida. It doesn't make any sense for them to come out and like show up against Mississippi State and then come out and lay an egg against Central Florida based on what I just said about, if they had an opportunity to lay down 2 weeks ago, why wouldn't you lay down now? And so I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're going to come out and they're going to give full effort. The question will be, sort of the turnover stuff that you talked about earlier, like that'll turn a game. The if you end up giving up a couple of big runs to KJ Jefferson, that'll turn a game. Like those sorts of things might end up causing the game to go in a direction that we don't want it to. But these teams are so even that I think you're probably looking at a one score game either way. Certainly that's what Vegas thinks. The lines shifted from Gators -3 to Gators +3 over the last 7 or 8 days. And so what that really says is nobody really knows what's going to happen. Money's come in on Central Florida recently, but maybe that's just a lot of people in Orlando who are wishful thinkers.
Well, it's or a lot of people in Gainesville who have watched the games too.
Well, I mean, look, I think
In
if
fact,
I'm a Central Florida fan, I'm not real pleased with my team right now and the way they showed up against Colorado.
no.
Right? I mean, Colorado's an okay team. They're not a great team. And Hunter's a great player, and Shedeur Sanders does some good stuff behind center, but that's not a great team. And I mean, they got manhandled by Nebraska. And so is Colorado a decent team? Yes, but I don't think I don't think that's a team that you sit there and go, "Oh, you definitely would have lost to that team." So this like the Central Florida team
I
coming in,
believe UCF was a 14.5 point favorite, by the way,
yeah,
in that
well,
game.
and uh, I don't think we want to necessarily talk about transitive properties, but what I would say is that the Central Florida performance up until that Colorado game, there were some warning signs there in terms of they shouldn't be 14-point favorites over anybody, really. And that's what we're seeing is we're seeing it come back to earth a little bit against Florida. Still, Central Florida is favored going into the swamp, and that says a lot about Florida. It says a lot about the program, says a lot about where it's at, and the fact that you and I are sitting here going, how does Florida eke this one out, as opposed to are they winning by 40 or 24? Like, like what, 10 years ago, that was the question, right? 10 years ago was, all right, 3 touchdowns or six. And now if we won by seven, I think people in the Florida world would be thrilled for two reasons. One is again, the point of the players not quitting and maintaining that culture. But the other part of it is that, there is that little brother syndrome with Central Florida. They got that 2017 banner up that's for a fake national championship. They like taking shots at Florida, and Florida lost a bowl game to them, and Florida didn't really have its players for that one. But in this one, Florida's trying to win, and so if Central Florida comes in and gets the win, it's legitimate that at least for this season, Central Florida is a better team than the Gators. The only caveat to that is that there's going to be a new sheriff in town. If Central Florida beats Florida, there will be a new sheriff in town very soon to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And So silver linings to everything, I suppose.
Well, and if Florida beats them, they might be Central Florida might be looking for a share for their own at some point soon here.
Well,
So,
I mean, it's a great point from the standpoint and the AD for Central Florida sort of did all the branding and the 2017 championship and all that stuff, and then goes to Tennessee, Danny White, and Tennessee's had a lot of success up there. Central hasn't really been able to repeat that success. And Malzahn is a good coach, and Malzahn's able to do a lot on offense, but their defense is terrible. And one of the things I keep going back to, and sort of went back to in my preview, is you think about Florida last year. I mean, against Arkansas, they scored a bunch of points. Against Missouri, they scored a bunch of points. Against LSU, they scored a bunch of points. Against South Carolina, they scored a bunch of points. Out of all of those, I mean, only Missouri had a good defense, and the other three were defenses sort of on par with this Central Florida defense. And Florida was putting up 35, 38, 41 points on those teams. So the idea that this is going to be, 45-7 Central Florida or something like that, I think is completely misguided. I think Florida's defense is going to struggle to stop them. They're going to struggle to stop Florida's defense, and so you're probably coming down to a one possession game. And the good news is that Florida's special teams have been really solid so far this year, um, in contrast to years past. And maybe we can get a kick where we've got everybody on, and everything goes well, and put that kick through and win by a field goal or something.
well, hopefully, man, shootout could be fun to watch. Shootout could be fun to watch on the bright
I'd
side.
like a competitive game. It would be nice to have a competitive game, right? Where we're not just sitting there going, ugh. Like, I mean, I guess if it's a blowout on Florida's side, I'm cool with that. But those slogs where it's like 20-0 after the first 12 or 14 minutes, it's just like, oh, like, this is awful. Like, I can't take a three more quarters of just of just wondering how can I try to get Billy Napier fired once again. Like, I don't want to do that. I hate writing that stuff. I want Florida to win, and I know there's some people out there who maybe want things to go the other way because they want to see some change. But that's not me at all. I want Florida to win, and if Napier turns this whole thing around and is able to win a bunch of games, I'm going to be somebody who's really happy to see that happen. And hopefully, this is the start of it.
1 month down of the college football season already. Flew by. It flew by. And we might have seen the game of the year already with Georgia going to Alabama and Tuscaloosa last week. I could not believe that Georgia made that comeback, and it really shows how hard those guys fight for Kirby just to keep them grounded in that game after being jumped on 28-0. It was totally unbelievable to see that opening because that wasn't like a fluke 28. Bama just pounded them. The offense was unreal from the get-go, and then Georgia kind of settled into the game, work their way back in, eventually take the lead, and they enjoyed that lead for all of what, 13 seconds? Was it? Have you seen the freeze frame that Williams caught the ball? There's 2 minutes and 26 seconds left.
I did see the I did
Call back to the second and 26 from the national championship game for those of you who aren't following, but I
Vegas knows.
unbelievable. Ryan Williams just had a total breakout performance. That last play was just a little cutback and pirouette. I don't know what to call it. I guess it's a pirouette, but just takes it down the sideline and into the history books. Bama holds on at the end with an INT in the end zone. What an unbelievable finish. And do we have any reason to believe that those two are not going to be the two in Atlanta this year? Or is Texas, we saw Ole Miss had some high hopes this offseason. They fall to Kentucky earlier in the day. It's looking like Bama, Texas, and Georgia, though, through the
Yeah,
first
I
month.
mean, look, I think the thing that would concern me if I'm an Alabama fan is how I allowed them back in the game, and it's not as though DeBoer doesn't have a history of being in close games. I mean, Washington last year makes it to the playoff, but one of the dings against them was that they were really lucky to do so. I think it was like 8 or 9 one-score victories last year, and now you've got a game where you have it in hand, and instead of putting them away and putting your foot on the throat of Georgia, you allow Georgia to fight back and quite honestly get really fortunate to be able to hold on to that game and win it. It's also at home. And so, I one of the interesting things I did not expect Ole Miss to get bit by Kentucky last week. I think Kentucky is a decent team. I don't think they're a great one. And Ole Miss got bit by them. And I think in many ways this sort of proves the point that everybody's been making about the 16 team SEC in general, which is that over time you start to wear down. And DeBoer has been holding on to a rabbit's foot now for about 3 years because he won a bunch of one-score games at Washington 2 years ago. He won a ton last year with Penix, and now he wins this one against Georgia. I don't know how long that good luck is going to last. You win about 50% of your one-score games. There is not some magic eight ball out there where coaches win 90% of those games, year over year over year. And so at some point, it's going to come back to bite him. Now the question is, one score game against Georgia is nothing to sniff at, right? If you'd have told me before the game that Alabama was going to win and they win by less than 7, I go, all right, yeah, like that's a solid win for DeBoer. But I do wonder. I mean, we saw this with Billy Napier coming over from Louisiana. He won a ton of one-score games at Louisiana. We saw this with Dan Mullen, where a lot of those seasons, the 10-3 season and the 11-2 season specifically, were bolstered by one-score games. And then 2 years later in 2021, I actually made a case maybe like 5 or 6 games into the season that people were being too harsh on him because they were losing a bunch of one-score games that they had won the last couple of years, and the underlying stats actually didn't look that bad. Now, there were extenuating circumstances there. But it was the same thing with Jim McElwain. Jim McElwain had sort of some pixie dust the first couple of years at Florida in one-score games. Then all of a sudden that fell apart there in year 3. And so I'm not sold on DeBoer, I guess is the point I'm trying to make, is that I think as the SEC season goes on, as these teams realize what it takes to go through a real SEC gauntlet where you don't have, especially for those teams in the East, where you don't have Vanderbilt, Kentucky, South Carolina, and those teams built into your schedule every year. I suspect there's going to be some opportunities for some folks to get bit. So I'm not ready to hand it to Georgia and Alabama yet, but that was a hell of a ball game, and um, I'm not sure that I would mind seeing part 2, quite honestly, if Florida's not in it, especially if part 2 can be a second loss for Georgia that knocks them out of the 12-team playoff. I'm all for it.
Early impression of Texas so far in the SEC.
I mean, I think obviously, I mean, they make the championship game last year. Quinn Ewers is a good quarterback, but limited. Arch Manning, since he's come in, has played pretty well. Not fantastic, but he's played pretty well. I think having 2 quarterbacks of that caliber certainly makes a difference. You don't necessarily have to worry if you need to run one. You have a solid backup at this point if Ewers goes down when he comes back, and the Sark has been putting together athletes down there. The recruiting classes that Texas has brought in have at least been on par with LSU. And LSU has proven that you can win national championships with that level of talent when you have high level quarterback play. So LSU's won with Joe Burrow most recently, and that was one. They had a lot of guys who were NFL quality there, but at the same time, Burrow was the one who made the engine roll. And I think in many ways, you're sort of seeing the same thing at Texas. The interesting thing will be how do you handle this dynamic, right? Like, if Manning is truly your better option, but Ewers is the guy who gets you to the championship game last year and you had him starting, how do you manage that if you're Sarkisian? And the personality aspect and the personnel aspect are really probably the most difficult things for coaches to manage. I would think these days, especially in the days of NIL. I mean, if I'm making $1 million a year, I still want to play. And plus, if I'm Ewers, I want to play because I want to make the league. And so there's incent I guess the incentives are not all aligned to necessarily always pick the best player. And so the question will be, is Sarkisian able to do that? Because I do think they probably have a better chance to win it all with Manning at quarterback. Maybe not this year. Maybe Ewers is a better player, but I think long term having Manning at the quarterback position is going to give him a better chance. And you know, we saw this with Clemson and Dabo Swinney when he made the change from Kelly Bryant to Trevor Lawrence, and all of a sudden went from a team that was just barely eking into the playoffs to one that was favored to win it and wound up winning it. And we'll see whether Sarkisian has the ability and the stones to sort of make that change if he thinks that's what's necessary.
How many more times are we going to see Auburn just hurt their fans the way they have, and then Hugh Freeze have an awesome press conference after?
Well, I mean, this is Hugh Freeze. I mean, this is who he is. He's a combustible person, and certainly has never been accused of having enormous moral character when it comes to different things. I saw a meme yesterday about it was the Tim Waltz thing from the debate where he had his eyes wide open, and it was Hugh Freeze when NCAA compliance asked to see his burner phone. And so there's a history with Hugh Freeze, right? And at the same time, there's a lot of really positive signs if I'm an Auburn fan in terms of what's going on in that program, specifically with the recruiting side of things. Um, I think there's always that there's always that balance of, how much do you criticize the players versus how much do you protect them? And I think Freeze sort of got tired of protecting him and decided he was going to do something about it. Now he's got to manage that within the program, and you know you expect to see a jump from year one to year two, and Auburn hasn't necessarily seen that. Certainly, the loss against Cal is a tough one to take if you're an Auburn fan, but um, you know given what you're seeing at Alabama with DeBoer, I can understand why Auburn fans would be a little bit hesitant. But we said this about the Florida job all year long: is it's very difficult to pick a head coach and know whether he's going to be great. And sometimes the retreads don't work quite as well, right? Petrino is somebody who's worked pretty well at multiple places. Saban obviously worked very well at LSU and Alabama, but again, extenuating circumstances. He left LSU. Spurrier worked very well at obviously Florida, but then at South Carolina. But how many times have there really been guys who've worked at multiple places throughout the country? And it's not as though Freeze was winning national championships at Ole Miss. He was recruiting in an era where sanctions were brought down, or at least allegations were made about the Laramie Tunsils of the world and sort of those guys who were finding their way to Oxford. And without that advantage, we'll see what he's able to do out there on the plains.
You're a Gator undergrad, and you went to Virginia Tech for graduate school. Did he catch the ball on Friday night against Miami?
Um, so that is an interesting question. I had actually fallen asleep during the game, so
Are you an ACC official?
you were sending me
You
text.
sound like an ACC official right now.
Apparently I am an ACC official. I am I am of the mind that if we're still arguing about a play after the play has occurred and replay doesn't clearly allow you to overturn the call on the field, that you shouldn't overturn the call on the field. So it was called a touchdown on the field, and I don't see any video evidence that says it definitively shouldn't be one. And so Miami has a loss, and they should have a loss. And shame on them because they should know going into Lane Stadium that you got to come ready to play. And look, Virginia Tech has had an up and down season. Certainly, a loss to Vanderbilt, not great on the schedule there. But this I think shows what we've talked about when it comes to Miami and sort of, you know, they may make the playoff, but I think they're going to get embarrassed in the playoff, especially depending upon the draw, because they can bully a Florida team who's struggling and who's got real issues. But they played a Virginia Tech team who's sort of meh, and all of a sudden it's a battle. And they'll probably have a couple more of those this year. They'll probably get bit and have one loss, and then they're still going to make the 12-team playoff because it's the U, and they're going to want that for TV, and also just because, they'll. I'm sure college football is still in the well, one loss versus two losses. We should put them in front. So I suspect they'll make the playoff, but I think that they're going to struggle when they get there because the SEC team they played is not an SEC team, right? In terms of at least one you would find in the top 12. And I think Virginia Tech exposed some flaws in terms of what they have, and man, it's really tough to see Powell Ryland just screaming around the edge there at Virginia Tech and causing havoc in the backfield. McClellan's playing well at Missouri. You got Andrew Chatfield, who went out to Oregon State and played really well. You got Donovan McMillan, who's played well at Pitt. It's really tough to see all these guys that we sort of covered as recruits coming in, going, you got to stack them. Some of them are going to work out, and it turns out that everybody who's transferred out has worked out, and Florida's defense can't tackle. So it's a rough one, even when you're watching the Hokies.
I'm not trying to get into the depths of the ACC here, but Clemson goes to Florida State. And if there's any bit of satisfaction you could take from the season as a Florida fan, it's that Florida State is very much suffering alongside of us. The Noles are almost in an impossible situation with Mike Norvell with a $68 million buyout. I know it's even crazy to talk about right now, considering they just went 13 and 1 last season, but Man, it really shows, Will. As much as you wanted to, some could point to FSU last season as the poster boy of a successful program that has embraced the transfer portal. You live by the portal, you die by the portal a little bit, huh? Like this is tough to recover when you miss on a couple key acquisition pieces.
Well, I mean, you've been writing about this for a while. That you had an article 2 years ago in our preseason magazine where you were looking at the portal, and I think you and I were both surprised when we looked at it and we're like, like the impact. Even when you think about the guys who hit, the impact overall is relatively small. You even looked at the guys who left Florida and went someplace else, and at least at that point, those guys hadn't made an impact. Now I just listed off 4 or 5 guys who have made an impact, but there's probably another 10 who've gone someplace else and haven't had much of an impact. Um, and then this year we had an article talking about in the preseason magazine talking about the portal being fool's gold. And there's no doubt that to build a solid program year after year, you got to do it at the high school level. I just don't think there's any doubt. I think the portal is supplementary. I think, bringing in a guy like Keon Coleman last year in conjunction with having Jordan Travis, and obviously Jordan Travis was a transfer as well. I think those guys in conjunction can lift your team to where you want to go. But you bring in Yui Agalele this year, and he's been bad. They haven't been able to replace the wide receiver position. The defense has been, not awful, but not great. And I mean, they just got ran off the field by SMU, and that's considering that Florida State has been trying to leave the ACC because the ACC has sort of sunk in stature because of bringing teams like SMU in, and then to just get absolutely boat raced by them is definitely embarrassing. Like you mentioned, they've got a huge buyout for Norvell. And this is not a program that has the same kind of money and the same kind of pockets that Florida does. And so it's not only that it's a higher buyout, it's that even if they had the exact same buyout that Florida has with Billy Napier on a proportion versus the giving that they get, it would be a much higher number. And the fact that it's twice buyout is for Billy Napier, even maybe 2.5x the buyout for Billy Napier is really an issue. And I said this last year, even while they were making the run, is that the high school recruiting was not at a place where Florida State was going to be able to sustain long term excellence. It was in a place where they could probably sustain long term 8-4 with big hits if they had a quarterback or if they got what they needed in the portal. They haven't been able to do that this year. The portal hits haven't hit. The quarterback's been bad. Now Ue Agalele is injured. And things are just sort of falling apart. But this is sort of you said live by the portal, die by the portal. It's not even that they made a decision to live by the portal and die by the portal. It's that the high school recruiting necessitated that they live by the portal and die by the portal. And as much as I hate to admit it, it looks like Georgia broke their program, and at least that means that one of Florida's rivals is down, and maybe we can get a win at the end of the year.
It'll be interesting to continue to watch, but Clemson coming into Tallahassee, I believe, this weekend, so that's not going to get much easier for them. So
We'll see.
it'll
Klubnik's
be
not that great either. So it'll be
well,
a rock
but
fight,
they've
man.
they've picked it up on offense. Their offense has been playing much better since the Georgia game. So yeah, I know they're not putting up against top-notch teams here, but they're scoring a lot of points right now. So we'll see how that goes. But they don't. I don't think
13-10 barn burner
I
there.
don't think they have to score a lot to win in Tallahassee this weekend, based on what I've seen out of that Florida State offense so far this season. So, all right, well, yeah, I just want to do a little wrap around the SEC and a little bit of Florida here to sum up the first month of the college football season. I can't believe it's already over, and we're already on to month number 2. So, uh, hopefully, it's a little better for the Gators. Will hopefully it's a little better. We'll keep
It's
our fingers
interesting. If they go
crossed.
if they go 2-2 in every month, we'll actually be talking about a halfway decent season by the end.
Yeah,
It's
I'll take.
probably not enough to say Billy, but if they go 2-2 every month, we're looking at 6-6, and we're looking at some wins over some top 10 opponents. So, um, yeah, we'll see where it lands.
UCF in the swamp, SEC
Central
Network,
Florida, damn it.
Central Florida in the swamp, SEC Network tonight kickoff. So everybody enjoy the night game in the swamp and let's get a win this weekend. Have a great weekend, everybody, and go Gators.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to Stand Up and Holler. If you're interested in more information from me and Nick, you can go over to readandreaction.com. You can like and subscribe our YouTube channel here at Read and Reaction, Or you can go to patreon.com/readandreaction to support us, get extra information, and we do Ask Anythings over there every once in a while as well. So check us out. Thanks for listening.